Give us a sense of like what the church in Myanmar is like.
Because of the ongoing um, attack and bombings, they invited everybody to meet in this big cave. It was this massive cave, and thousands of people came, and they did this Christmas outreach. And over 2,000 people accepted Christ that day.
Hello, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Grosso. This is a podcast about learning to love generously like Jesus, and I am so glad you're here with us on the show. On today's episode, I interview Alex Grant from Venture, a nonprofit that brings hope to tough places. Alex and I talk about the earthquake that happened in March 2025 in Myanmar, and how that acute crisis happened in a context of decades of political and economic instability. We also discuss integral mission, whether the private sector could fill the gap with USAID cuts, and what Venture is continuing to do to make a difference in Myanmar. I loved Alex's energy and passion during this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. And I learned a lot myself during it about a crisis in a country that no one is talking about, or it certainly feels that way. This is your podcast. So as always, send me your thoughts, your questions, and your suggestions at brian@simplecharity.org. And if this show is helpful to you, please click a 5-star rating in your podcast app in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or even both. That would be amazing. This really does make a huge difference to get the show out to more listeners. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's melissahall@simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
Alex Grant, thank you for joining me on the Simple Charity Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Alex, what are you grateful for today?
There's a lot to be grateful for today, but I think primarily, even before we jumped in, we were talking a little bit about our families, and I'm so grateful for my family. I have a 18-month-old at home. My wife is pregnant with our second, and my wife's pregnancies aren't the easiest. Most women don't have easy pregnancies, but my wife still, about halfway through her pregnancy, is throwing up a few times every morning. And yet she doesn't let it beat her, and she continues to recover day after day. And I'm just so grateful for the Lord's grace, for health. Actually, next week we should find out the gender of the baby. So we're in a fun
That's
season
exciting.
as a family, man, and just so grateful that we get to serve the Lord together as a family.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I was just sharing. I have 3 small kids, and so it's we're still in the season of just chronic sleep deprivation and all the fun of that, but also
Totally.
all the joy. We have 3 boys, so it's a lot of boy energy, a lot of like wrestling and hitting each other with plastic swords and stuff. That's where we're at
Totally.
in our house.
Totally, man. Yeah, my first is a little boy. His name is Wesley. And then like I said, we should find out the gender of the second next week. So we'll see. We'll see if we're gonna join you on the old boys train.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Alex, you work for a nonprofit called Venture, and would love to learn more about what that nonprofit does today. I also want to talk about the recent earthquake in Myanmar. And so before we talk about the earthquake, let's just start with Venture. What do you do for the organization? Give us a quick snapshot overview of what Venture is, what's its mission, what's its kind of like main programs?
100%. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so Venture is an organization that's focused on bringing hope to the unreached or to bring justice to the unreached. And we focus particularly on places that are tough. And we defined a tough place as places that are unsafe. And so, first and foremost, those are places that are typically riddled with war and conflict and chaos, places of human trafficking, extreme poverty, child soldiering, and so forth. And so we want to focus on bringing God's kingdom to tough places that are unsafe. In addition to them being unsafe, they are unreached. And so they are places with less than 2% gospel witness. And so that leads us to places, particularly in Southeast Asia as an organization. So we serve in Myanmar, which we'll talk about today, but we also have a lot of projects, programs, and work going on in several other countries like Nepal and Thailand in Southeast Asia. In addition to them being unsafe and unreached, we also focus on places that are under-resourced, which is maybe the greatest injustice of all, that the places that are needed most receive the least. And so we focus on places that receive less than 1% of all Christian giving. And again, that brings us to this zone, particularly in Southeast Asia right now. Now, by God's grace, He continues to lead us to expand that work into other places along the Silk Road and even into other regions that are within that zone of it being a tough place. But within those tough places, we identify certain challenges, obstacles, injustices, and we partner with leaders that are already there within those regions, indigenous leaders, Nepali leaders, Thai leaders, Burmese leaders who desire to see God's kingdom come. And we help to develop programs and initiatives that provide holistic generational transformation. So we particularly focus on church planting, long-term sustainable church planting, and transformative community development. And we desire to see those two mend in such a way where God's kingdom can come and be fully established to bring full transformation within that region. So yeah, we're so grateful. Over the past few years, we've really seen incredible fruit. Where last year we saw over 8,000 churches planted amongst the unreached in Southeast Asia. 8,000
It's
churches
awesome.
planted. We're just so incredible, so grateful for what God's doing in those regions. But we've also seen over 500 individuals rescued from human trafficking,
Mm,
and receive education and development and healing. And we've also seen over 13 million meals distributed to those in need.
mm.
And so that's a part of what we'll talk about is obviously how that intersects with places like Myanmar. But we've seen that in that need really distributed across Southeast Asia. So yeah, we're grateful. We're grateful for what God's doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting to hear you give the overview, it sounds like there's a lot of different kinds of programs and interventions that you do, and so I feel like what I've seen with nonprofits is that sometimes nonprofits have a like a specific thing that they do, like, hey, we do like anti-trafficking work through transit monitoring at transportation hubs, and that's what we do, and we're going to scale that program to place to place to place to place. But would it be fair to say that Venture is more of taking like a place-based focus, and so you go into the community, you build those relationships with local leaders, and then there's a sense of what are the needs here, what are the assets here, and then how can we kind of plug in to do the things that make sense in this particular place? Would that be one way of describing Venture's kind of approach to this work?
Yeah, that's great, Brian. I think 100%. Yeah, I think there are some key programs that are foundational blocks to Venture. A part of that is our disciple making church planting programming and approach. We do a lot with church planting and disciple making. We do a lot with women's empowerment and feminine hygiene, a lot with food and farming. So both in terms of meeting urgent needs with direct meals. We also do a lot with sustainable agriculture and actually helping farmers to create sustainability within their communities. So food and farming, women's health and hygiene, church planting, and community development are all some of the key programs that we utilize, but it's very relationally oriented
Yeah.
and focused on the place. That each place has a unique need. We also do a lot in terms of persecution support and oppression
Mm.
support, and working with the global church as they face just really hard and challenging obstacles for sharing their faith, for gathering together as a community, for delivering meals. We have partners right now that are in prison. We had a partner
Yeah.
that was in stocks for 3 weeks, like in like
Mm.
medieval stocks for 3 weeks, in one of the locations that we serve. And we've been supporting him and his family, and we've been rallying our community to pray. And just a few days ago, he was released from the stocks. Now he's still in prison,
Wow.
but it was a complete miracle. There's no reason why he should have been taken out of the stocks, but he was. And so we do a lot with persecution and oppression as well. And then refugee care as a whole. So some of that is
Mm.
food and farming, but some of that is also entrepreneurial training and skills. So yeah, it is pretty comprehensive. And people ask, what does Venture do? Well,
Right.
it's easier to talk to you about our vision, and our vision is long-term community transformation, and to give you examples of what that's looked like. Like in one
Hmm.
community
Hmm.
in Nepal, we saw holistic transformation occur because of church planting in watermelon fields.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
it's the Rana people group have seen incredible transformation in their community, and we did it through planting watermelon fields and seeing the church planted in their community. So it's different in every place, and we try to be led by the Lord in that way.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to talk about Myanmar. So in March, on March 28th, 2025, there was a 7.7 magnitude earthquake that struck central Myanmar. And I was mentioning this before this call, like we want to actually record a few different podcast episodes about the earthquake in Myanmar and what different organizations are doing to respond to it. But by the time these go out into the ether, they will be so far beyond the 24-hour news cycle that like my hunch is that people will be like, oh yeah, that happened, like there's a lot happening right now in the
Yeah,
news and in the world, and that's basically always true, and these things kind of come and go, but that process of rebuilding is slow, it's long, it's hard, and so we want to actually talk about this, even though we're 3 months, 6 months after the actual earthquake itself. So this earthquake destroyed more than 50,000 buildings in Myanmar and displaced around 200,000 people. So that's 200,000
mm,
people who, their homes are gone. They have to find some sort of temporary shelter. There's some sort of, substance and housing and all these kind of urgent relief needs. One estimate I saw was that 1.3 million people were affected by the earthquake. And so I'm curious, I guess, about how Venture responds to disaster. So a lot of even what you were just sharing, within the categories of relief, rehabilitation, and development, seems like there was
mm.
an emphasis on this idea of development and kind of long-term transformational development and transformational impact. So what do you do in terms of relief, and
Mm.
and what have you done in particular in Myanmar?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think even if I can, Brian, just to provide a little bit of additional context as it relates to the situation in Myanmar. The March 28th, 7.7 magnitude earthquake was really the last of a series of conflicts and situations of chaos in the country of Myanmar. And I think
Yeah.
the underground chaos is making it even more difficult to respond to the ongoing crisis. And so
Mm.
just briefly, I mean, in our opinion, as an organization, what's going on in Myanmar today is the worst thing, potentially the worst thing that's happening in the world that no one knows about. And
Wow.
I think that's what I so appreciate about your intentionality to highlight Myanmar, is because there's a lot of crises in the world right now, from Ukraine to Sudan,
Yep.
There are things going on all around the world that we as believers, that our heart breaks for, and yet no one knows about what's happening in Myanmar. And it is the longest lasting civil war in history, 75 plus years.
Hmm.
And in 2021, there was a coup, and it's again a series of conflicts within the country. There was a coup in 2021 where the military took power of the government, and the military is called the junta in Myanmar. And there have been uh, it has been not only a humanitarian crisis, but it has been a human rights crisis, where Myanmar is full of ethnic minority people groups within the country, and the military has been committing genocide on its own
Hmm.
people, on the ethnic minority people groups. And so long before the earthquake struck,
Yeah.
these ethnic minority people groups have been forced to leave their homes because their own military government is bombing their homes. And so
Hmm.
they've been forced to leave. So Venture has been serving for a decade, particularly on the border of Thailand and Myanmar. And we've been so grateful for our partners, both there and here in the United States, who have been supporting these efforts. And we've built incredible relationships with Feed My Starving Children and other organizations who have partnered with Venture to supply life-saving meals for both internally displaced people and refugees as they're fleeing, to meet them with relief. So that's the backdrop of what Venture has
Right.
been doing, and we've started educational centers and schools. We have a partner that serves 3,000 widows and orphans every single day because of the war,
Hmm.
and it's we serve these communities both through education, refugee care, and meeting urgent needs with meals, particularly.
So you guys
Sorry,
had
go ahead.
this. Yeah. So you guys had this like established presence in Myanmar before the earthquake. So you're doing this long-term transformational development work, serving refugees and and responding to the crises of violence and people who I mentioned people who were displaced just because of the earthquake, but I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people were displaced beforehand by the conflict um, and then I guess how did the earthquake affect that ongoing work that you were doing?
Yes, yeah. So with that backdrop in mind, the earthquake has obviously exacerbated the problem, and because now entire cities that we've been primarily serving on the eastern border, but now right in central Myanmar, in the Mandalay area where the earthquake struck, there are cities that lie in ruins, stripped of power and safety. Many of our partners and friends who lived in that area had to sleep outside for a week in the hot, blistering sun because they were not confident enough to sleep inside their own buildings. And
Mm.
and so there's danger all around. There's lack of resources and supplies. And so Venture, since March 28th, has been working tirelessly with our partners to find out avenues into central Myanmar. And I think this is what's particularly challenging with the current governmental structure within Myanmar. Is it is documented across news outlets that the government has all of these checkpoints to get into the earthquake zone, and they divert aid and food
Yeah.
and take it for their own military uses. And
Hmm.
so, thankfully, by God's grace, our partners have already developed an underground railroad system to
Hmm.
deliver food into the country. Now, it never went that far previously, but it was in through jungles and through rivers under the cover of night to bring food to the most vulnerable, hiding in holes in the ground. And that was the situation before the earthquake. And
Right.
so
Right.
now
Right.
our yeah, and so now our partners have had to work even more tirelessly and fearlessly to bring food even further into the country to meet people within the earthquake zone. So it's been incredibly dangerous, but our partners continue to move forward. They we don't tell them that they have to, but they themselves are so compelled by Christ's love that they do whatever they can. And so on the venture end, we've supplied um, we've supplied emergency kits that include blankets and water filters. We've provided cholera prevention resources that can actually prevent a cholera outbreak. Birthing kits is something that we provide because my wife is still pregnant and 40 weeks comes and you don't have a choice. And so there's all of these ongoing necessities that occur. And so we're partnered with our leaders and other organizations that are there too. It's not just Venture. There's other organizations that have other connections that the kingdom of God is so beautiful in that way that we get to partner together. But a lot of still what we do in terms of meeting urgent needs is food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thinking about again, I guess giving some more context for Myanmar. You mentioned a hallmark of your work with Venture is evangelism and discipleship. Give us a sense of what the church in Myanmar is like. How many people in Myanmar are Christians? You mentioned that your local partners are believers, so there's something of a network of believers that you could partner with and work with and work through to do this work. But what's kind of the spiritual climate of Myanmar?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. And I think I can speak to our partners specifically. Maybe one thing that I'll highlight is, we do have a network of underground churches that meet together regularly, and churches continue to get planted year over year in the country of Myanmar. But we had one of our partners, they always host Christmas outreaches, and it's just a beautiful time. They just did Easter outreaches not too long ago, but going back to Christmas, because of the ongoing attack and bombings, they invited everybody to meet in this big cave. It was this massive cave, and thousands of people came, and they did this Christmas outreach, and over 2,000 people accepted Christ that day. And I think there is this palpable despair that when people begin to hear that this life is not all that there is, that there is a God who loves them, that came down in human flesh and died on their behalf and gives them dignity and value and desires for them to have new life now and forevermore, that there's hope, is that there is this hunger. Hunger in the people in Southeast Asia, particularly in Myanmar, for Christ. And so we're seeing that, and we're so grateful for that. I think one of the quotes that I have from one of our partners long term, they said, each bag of rice you provided has brought not just nourishment, but also a reminder that we are not forgotten. But also a reminder that we are not forgotten. And we as an organization are committed to bring food and the love of Christ and the hope of Christ together. And so when people begin to understand, awesome. we're not forgotten by the rest of the world or by our Thai brothers and sisters or our other Burmese brothers and sisters, but God sees us. And we're not forgotten by the one who created us. And we actually have the ability, because of his great grace, to be in a relationship with him. And so, I mean, we're not at the place maybe where I could give you numbers per se, but I can tell you that God is moving in a special way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so much of what I'm hearing you share about Venture's approach is, what I would put in this category of some people call it integral mission, kind of this kind of Great Commission and Great Commandment hand in hand. It's Amen. We're not just promoting, prompting the questions by loving on people. We're actually preaching the gospel, but we're also not just preaching the gospel to hungry people and not giving them food when we can. Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
doing both at the same time. And, and I think a lot of people much smarter than I have argued that's very biblical. That's kind of what we see in the life of Jesus and how he does ministry, like it's word and deed. And I think Bryant Myers in Walking with the Poor has this like idea of ministering and word and deed and sign. And I think there was another one.
mm,
I can't remember the fourth. But anyway, so this idea of, this integral holistic approach. So I think that's awesome. So I think we need
yeah,
more of that kind of thinking, like Great Commission and Great Commandment, loving our neighbors near and far, keep
100%.
things super simple. What does love look like in this particular context? And love, when we love people, we care about their actual like bodies and physical needs in addition to their spiritual lives. We care about
Yeah,
both.
yeah. Yeah, I completely agree, Ryan. I think that's at the heart of who we are at Venture, and the heart that our partners carry is that we see Jesus's call to make disciples, and
Yeah.
disciples are those that love people, love God with their whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love their neighbor, and that looks like something. And I love the integral mission idea. I think the Lausanne Conference does a great job of, or the Lausanne Congress does a great job of putting words to that. That there's the demonstration of the gospel and the declaration of the gospel, and they shouldn't be separated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we
That's right.
believe that they it's the whole gospel for the whole person, for the whole world.
Yep.
And that's our desire, and that's our heart. And Matt, or in Isaiah 58:10 says, if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. And your
Hmm.
light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. And so, yeah, we're compelled by the heart of God to help people understand that there is a God who loves them and who has a plan for them and who has hope for them, and to spend ourselves on behalf of the hungry and to satisfy the needs of the oppressed. That we can't just turn away.
Yeah. I did want to ask you about, like another thing that's happening in the world as this, earthquake happened is the kind of cutting back of USAID. And so,
Mm,
this is impacting a lot of relief and development organizations. USAID did most of its work through projects. So basically, USAID sends out this grant application, and anyone can apply, business or nonprofit, faith-based or secular, and they're bidding for these projects, and if they win the project, then they get funding, and then they can implement it. And so you have groups like World Vision, like Catholic
mm,
Relief Services, whose budget was heavily based on USAID. They were getting this money, and then now it's gone. So, and this is an evolving situation. There's been some reinstatement of funding for life-saving aid.
mm.
But this all is kind of happening really immediately prior to this earthquake. So I'm curious about like if you have seen any impact of those sort of like political things happening in the U.S. and your work in
Mm.
Myanmar. Big question here, Alex. And but I think this is like we don't really usually talk a lot about, I don't know, national politics as Simple Charity, but
Mm.
this is something where this is kind of like an issue that has really impacted Christian relief and development organizations, and it's
Totally.
still evolving. It's an evolving situation. Like I said, some of the funding is coming back. Frankly, I have no idea 6 months from now what it's going to be. Certainly have no idea what's going to happen, 4 years from now when we have another administration. But have you guys been impacted by all of the happenings with USAID?
That's a great question, Brian. Yeah, and I think we would be foolish to think that the politics in our own country don't impact the world. Obviously, that they do, and I think conversations around that are important. I think personally speaking, or organizationally speaking, as Venture, we have been blessed by the grace of God, where our funding comes through partnering churches, through foundations, uh, uh, spiritual Christian-based foundations, and individuals, businesses. We also have a strong arm that we call Venture Miles. And so something that, we can talk about more if you'd like, but we have a whole segment of our organization based here in the United States where individuals will run, bike, and hike on behalf of those in need around the world. We say that
Mm,
individuals will do tough things for people in tough places. And so
mm,
individuals will run marathons or hike mountains, and they'll give of themselves physically on behalf of those in need. And so we have over 3,000 participants every year across North America who will run, bike, and hike and raise awareness and support for anti-human trafficking to refugee care. And so we've been blessed by the Lord to be a fruitful organization that hasn't been dependent upon government aid. So we personally have not been impacted. Now, the regions that we serve have been impacted.
yeah.
And so the need has grown. Now,
Yep.
um, we haven't personally seen that in Myanmar particularly. The most of the UN based countries haven't had a positive relationship with Myanmar since the coup. um, really the only trading the only trading nations there are with Myanmar are China and Russia. And so, but I do know that USAID and the cutting of that has really impacted some of our partners, for instance, in East Africa. We have
Yeah.
some partners in that region of the world that have been significantly impacted. And so we're trying to determine how do we continue to partner with churches and foundations to meet that gap? How does the
Hmm.
church arise in this moment
Good.
to move from places that are under resourced, that receive less than 1% of all Christian giving, to actually rise to meet the lack of government funding, that the church can actually rise to fill that gap? So we're um, being led by the Holy Spirit in that. But yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, one of the things I think about with USAID, USAID's budget's $40 billion a year, or it was $40 billion a year,
it's insane.
and you know, uh, foundations in the U.S. have a combined total of $1.5 trillion of assets. So if you toss in donor advised fund assets to that, about 1.8 trillion, and it's going to hit 2 trillion sometime this year, next year, depending on what the stock market does. And but you think about $2 trillion of philanthropic assets. If people, grant making bodies, increased their payout rates by 2%, it would cover the USAID gap. So there's been some
Wow.
conversation in the in response to this of like, it has to be the government. The private sector can't do it. And I don't buy, I don't think mathematically that's true.
Mm,
Like my
mm.
estimate is that Christians who steward philanthropic bodies, have around $1 trillion of assets in philanthropic capital. And so if just the Christians who are in charge of these institutions, increase their payout rates by 4%, it would fill that gap. So I think the church can fill that gap. And then the other thing I'll just say, and I know I'm throwing out a lot of big heady numbers.
Oh, this is great.
That's probably hard to process if you're just listening to this podcast, but Americans give $500 billion a year, and so a $40 billion budget, is meaningful and it's substantial. But again, the private sector we can do this work with giving. The church alone can do this work with giving. And so I think this is a moment. I think lots of foundations are thinking this way, but I think if you're a Christian, you're a trustee of a foundation, then you believe the government shouldn't be doing this,
Mm.
funding these international aid projects. I think this is a good time to consider stepping up and saying, hey, maybe we could increase our payout rate for our foundation, by 2 to 5%, and give to international relief organizations, and I think I have heard some conversations of foundations that are thinking along those terms. Like, this is a good time for for a meaningful action to fill the gaps that are existing around the world. Whether that's
Yeah, that's
in
good.
disaster relief and response, whether that's in HIV medication, with PEPFAR no longer being funded, and there's multiple avenues here. And I think, gosh, like if we could do that as the church and do it with like, hey, we're doing this because of Jesus,
Yeah.
because we believe the gospel is true.
Mm.
I think that's actually a really, incredible opportunity for the church um, to be a light on the world, a light in the world, city on the
Yeah,
hill.
100%.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think, yeah, why not? Why not let this be the moment where the governments of the world will come and go, but the kingdom of God will last forever. And why
Yeah.
not this be a moment where when everything else seems shaky, that we as the church point to the only one who is our rock. And we
Mm.
say, hey, all of this is temporary, but we care about something that's much more eternal. And so,
Mm.
yeah, we at Venture have been really privileged just to be able to be connected to people with a similar heart as yours, Brian, whether that's foundations, again, Miles participants, church partners, and even businesses. Like we have 30 plus businesses that have partnered with Venture with some form of a giving back program and process, whether that's towards anti-human trafficking or refugee care. And I think even within the more of the public business sector, like it's an opportunity for kingdom-minded entrepreneurs to go, hey, like let's have successful businesses that impact our sector of society, and let's use the profits that God gives us, yes, to invest back into our own communities, but also to meet the urgent needs of the world. And I think people are thinking that way more and more.
Yeah. Love that, Alex. Well, thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for educating us today and sharing some about what you're seeing through Ventures programs in Myanmar, and really helping us, helping me just have this context for the crises that were already happening before this earthquake.
Mm,
And, I think for a lot of our listeners, the earthquake in Myanmar in March was this blip on their news feeds
mm,
that came and went. And yet, they might not even be aware that there was a 75-year civil war before that, that there's,
yeah,
that there was a coup in 2021. And then now this is an additional crisis layering on to what's happening already, and the great needs that were already there. So,
yeah,
yeah, just appreciate this conversation.
yeah, 100%. I'm very, very honored and grateful that you'd have us on and that you would take space and time out of your podcast to highlight both the challenges and the opportunities around the world, and that you'd particularly highlight Myanmar. Like I said, it's dear to our heart, and our brothers and sisters are there, some of the most fearless, courageous, joyful people I've ever met, and we want to continue to support them in any way that we can. So yeah, I just, as a kind of final parting thought in my end, we just ask for your prayers.
Mm.
As listeners of this podcast, we ask for your prayers that you would pray, um, for those impacted by the earthquake, that they would be provided for. That you pray for our partners, that they would be divinely strengthened by the Lord, and that they would find avenues to serve, and that there would be peace in Myanmar.
Mm.
God tells us to pray in faith that the mountain would move, and that's a mountain in our day, for
Mm.
peace in Myanmar, for peace and justice to prevail there. So, yeah, we just ask for your prayers,
That's
that you
awesome.
would partner with us in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Alex. And if, yeah, I encourage all of our listeners to pray for people in Myanmar, to pray for the work that Venture is doing. If you want to give to Venture, it's venture.org. Is that right?
Venture.org. Yeah, you can learn more.
Venture.org. Yep. So you can look them up there and get more information if you're interested in, making a larger gift, a larger investment. I bet Alex would be willing to connect with you. That's just a hunch. If not him, someone from the
Love
team would
that.
certainly be willing to do that. Yeah, just as we're closing out, Alex, what would you say you're learning in this season of life about what it means to love like Jesus?
Man, I think, I mentioned a dear brother in Christ who was in the stocks for 3 weeks. And I think I've been thinking a lot about the cost of following Jesus and what it means to endure and to suffer for him, and to do so with joy. And, Jesus says, rejoice. If you have been persecuted, rejoice, which we don't understand very well. But I think I've been processing a lot recently. One of the values that we have as an organization that we've learned from our partners is called defiant joy. And that in the midst of oppression, persecution, and trial, not to fake being happy, but to have defiant joy in such a way where you can be honest and transparent and vulnerable about your emotions, and to recognize that in the face of it all, we can have hope. And so I've been challenged in prayer, in my time with the Lord, as I pray for our partners who have faced persecution, to learn from them how it looks like to endure and to have great joy.
The invitation to grow this week is to pray for Myanmar. Pray that God brings peace to a country that has been ravaged by decades of civil war, and that God's people would shine like a light in the darkness. Thank you to Michael Hansen for editing this episode, and Grace Sukach for the podcast art. If you have feedback on this episode, you can reach me at brian@simplecharity.org. On the next show, I interview someone with a PhD in the sociology of religion and philanthropic studies. This guy literally has a PhD in giving. And he also led a foundation through a sunset, giving away tens of millions of dollars and spending down the principal. Join me for a fascinating conversation on private foundations and the love of Jesus. See you next time.